All right, so you might have heard somebody say that they wanted to play a song in the key of C or in the key of B flat. And what does that mean? Well, in the simplest way that I can put it, key is really just an area, it's a collection of notes that we're going to use as the raw material for our melodies and our harmonies and bass lines. So in a lot of ways, the key is really determined by the group of notes that we choose to play. And those group of notes we call scales. So I'll go back to one that I drew earlier in the lesson. So that group of notes is called a major scale. And when you hear it, you recognize it. It kind of sounds like somebody practicing the piano. And all a scale is simply a set of notes that we use as the raw material for building out the song in terms of melody and harmony and bass parts. And where do they come from? What are scales really? Really what they are patterns of whole steps and half steps. So in the very first lesson we learned about the distance of C to C sharp being a half step, C to D being a whole step. And the pattern of this scale that I'm playing is like this. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. So if I write it on the board here, I'll actually show you the distance between each note in the scale. So from C to D, whole step. From D to E, whole step. E to F is a half step. F to G, whole. G to A, whole. A to B is a whole step. And the last interval, which is B back to C, is a half step. So it's whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And that pattern will always give you a major scale no matter what note you start on a piano. So I can play it here, but I can also play it here or here. So I'm just playing the same intervals of whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Okay, that's fine. We have a major scale, but what does it have to do with key? Well, what that means then is that if I play a song, I'm going to choose those notes to be the melody, the raw material for the melody and the harmony of the song. So the song I was playing in the last lesson was just Mary Had a Little Lamb, right? And you can see that I'm only playing the white notes on the piano. And the key of C, which starts on a C, it uses only the white notes on the piano. So my melody is using those same notes, right? And the first note of the scale is the note C. So I'm playing in the key of C. And if I were to play harmony to that song, I would use the same notes. I would use white notes on the piano, and I might play a chord that goes like this. So you can see I'm only playing the white notes on the piano. And the same thing if I was to play a bass part. Now we know that the scale that we're using for our raw material is going to determine the key that we're in. If we decide to play a song in the key of C, and somebody says, I would like to play that song in a higher key, you can simply translate those intervals to a higher key. So eventually, when you learn more about music theory and get more comfortable playing in more than one scale, you can take a melody that you've composed in one key and you can transpose it to a different key. It's still the same melody, you're just playing it in a different position. So for right now, I'm going to keep everything in the key of C just to keep it simple. But just so that you know, when you hear somebody say, oh, we're going to do this in the key of B flat, we're going to do it in the key of G, they basically mean we're going to use the notes from those scales as the raw material for our song. Okay, so far I've played the happy major scale, But there's also a scale that uses only the white notes that's not necessarily a happy sounding scale. It's the scale and the key of A minor. So for that one, we're going to start on the note A, which is 3 notes below, and we're going to call that the beginning of the scale. And I'm going to draw it on the board here. So again, all white notes, no sharps or flats, but I'm starting on an A and going up to the next A. So you can tell it has a different feel. It's got kind of a sadder tone, right? So this particular grouping of notes or pattern we call the minor scale. And just like with the major scale, it has its own formula. And the formula, and I'm not going to write it down, I don't think it's important right now, but it's whole, half, whole, half, whole, whole. Those are the intervals between the notes that give us that minor sound. And just like with major scales, you can play that pattern starting on any note on the keyboard, and you will always get a minor scale. So now we have major scales, which are kind of happy sounding, and we have minor scales, which sound maybe a little bit more sad. So I want to just point out 2 notes in every scale, whether it's major or minor, that are really important to the scale. The first note is really important. So in the key of A minor, the note A is a really important note. It's kind of like home for that key. And we give it the name tonic. So here's an A. And we're going to call that the tonic note in the key of A. And if we go up to the 5th note of a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, this E we call the dominant. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that note is the dominant note. The dominant note in any key, in any scale, is a really important one because it tends to take us back to the home note. So, and we're going to find too that when we start getting into harmony, the chord that we're going to build on that 5th note, that dominant note, is going to be a very, very important note for taking us back home to 1, or the tonic. So just to recap, we've got C major, all the white notes starting from C. We have A minor, all the white notes starting from A. The first note of any scale is called tonic, and the 5th note of any scale we call the dominant.